Welcome to the Inner Athlete Podcast, where we help young athletes, parents, and coaches build strong, resilient, and high-performing athletes for sport and life. I'm Trent, head strength conditioning coach and founder of Inner Athlete. Each episode, we break down the training, mindset, and habits that actually matter, from strength and speed development to injury prevention, confidence, and long-term athletic growth. Whether you're a parent trying to support your child or an athlete chasing their potential, you're in the right place. Let's get into today's episode. Welcome back to the Inner Athlete Podcast. I've got a international special guest this time around, an old friend of mine, former intern or former colleagues over at the University of Wisconsin. I've got Jaime Fernandez. First of all, Jaime, thanks for taking the time. I know our time zones are probably some of the worst to kind of link up timing-wise. So thanks for coming on to today's podcast.
I appreciate you having me, man. It's always fun to get to catch up and talk to you, and it's not too bad. It's only 8 p.m. right now. It's not bad.
Yeah, well, I think it's 2 p.m. today, so, on a Saturday. So
nice.
Yeah, it's thank God it's actually somewhat nice weather in Melbourne. Melbourne's known as like the 4 seasons in one day. So unfortunately, in Victoria, we're suffering a bit of like bushfires, and then the area that got a bushfire, like literally like half an hour away, it's been flooding.
Oh dang!
I was like, jeez. And it's not even from the rain, it's just from the mountains as well. So it's all riverine flooding. So it's like, people got caught out, and apparently some cars got floated down the river and out to sea. Yeah. It was so quick.
But I have to go one day, man. Melbourne.
Yeah, come to Melbourne. It's a sporting capital. We've got the NFL coming over. We've got the Rams and the Eagles coming over for round 1 is the opener next season. Which will be later on this year, because one of the Aussies, Jordan Mailata, he plays for Philly, so he's one of the linemen. Obviously, winning the Super Bowl, very prolific, and he's like one of the best athletes, money wise, that Australia's produced. And he played rugby league as well, so he played a completely different sport and then transitioned across to playing NFL. And yeah, but the Australian Open on. The wild card games are on at the moment, so they'll be kicking off really soon with the tennis, and then the Soccer World Cup's kicking off on your end as well.
Coming up, man. Coming up fast. I'm trying to see if I get some tickets to try and see if LA, kind of one of the closer locations to where we are here in Tucson. See if I catch one game to the World Cup. That'd be nice.
Yeah, and then I think the reason why I wanted you on today's podcast was like I wanted to go back and bring you back on because a lot has changed from the last 18 months since we last spoke.
Yeah.
You had the NIL literally just kicking off, and kind of no one knew. It was like the Wild West in terms of the deal that was being made, in terms of college athletes now being able to make money off their name, image, and likeness, hence the name, the NIL. We also have a bit of a change in landscape in terms of the women's sports side as well. And what I'm noticing, I think from a social media perspective more so now, and then there's a lot of researchers and professors coming out and talking about the mental performance perspective, where we as S&C coaches, we know it's a big part. If you're in a positive state, your tolerance to hard work is obviously going to be a lot higher compared to someone who's in a real negative state. That's just kind of like a very baseline understanding of it. But now it's really kind of becoming more of an actual science and being applied in various ways now that are more subtle, but are built upon, training cycles, mesocycles, microcycles, just, literally on a weekly basis, which is really cool to see. But also the injury, I guess more in the injury rate. For some reason, there seems to be an increase in the injury rate. So is there something that's gone on from a sports medicine side, from an S&C side? Is there something that's happening from a lack of education, from a parent's side, from a coach's side? Or, there's so many things and moving parts in terms of what actually causes injuries these days because of, I guess, the monetary value associated with youth sports and collegiate sports as well, of, the pressure for these kids to perform. So, I think we're kind of shining a light on that area, and then obviously we're going to discuss that in a bit more detail. So I kind of want to get back into the return to play and the guidelines. Before we actually do that, just tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure, man. So kind of like you said, we go back, man, was it 2016 now? It seems almost 10 years
2017.
ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. So did my grad work at Wisconsin. That's where you and I met. Crossed over for a little bit, and that was my first internship in this realm of sports performance and stuff. Um, Left Wisconsin in 2017 for a volunteer position here at the University of Arizona. Came over, and around the time there was some transition. My boss here, Jim Crumples, great guy, been in the field for a long time. He'd been growing the department little by little, and you could tell it was the right place at the right time because that position turned into a full time. And I've been here since. So this is going into my ninth season now. I've worked with a ton of the teams here at Arizona. Uh, Went from just assistant coach or assistant performance coach to assistant director, and this past summer I got into a director role here. Work with volleyball, gymnastics, and men's tennis at the moment. And as we've talked, I've worked with many of the teams here. I've helped out with baseball, a lot of the track and field teams. I've helped out with swimming. So it's a little bit of the background, and we've seen some of the changes. Went through COVID here, and NIL started kicking off, like you said, not too long ago, and still a big feeling of still the Wild West, man. They're trying to put regulations and some safe guardrails around it, but there's a lot of unknowns. Uh, yeah, in a nutshell, that's from a performance standpoint, career-wise, that's where I'm at.
It's good. No, I think it's great that you have so much experience now in the industry, especially in the collegiate side. And then you can obviously pull upon that and see a lot of trends that have changed. It's such a young industry compared to where it was, when Nebraska's football program kicked off strength and conditioning, the origin days of it, of just getting in the gym, to, when Chicago Bulls started implementing, more that strength training for their team to just get them more robust and stronger on the court, to where it is now. It's really kind of gradually evolved, and and now we see a lot of the Soviet stuff coming out. People are talking more about it because I think people are understanding it a little bit more and being able to how to implement it. But I want to talk to you about more like the return to play. So in the last time we discussed, we talked about return to play protocols in terms of, it's not just about getting clearance to go train, it's more about performance readiness. And you've spoken about testing that you do with your athletes, and you use that as a bit of a marker of the likelihood of them being able to do X, Y, and Z in their training sessions. If you could just break that down a little bit more, it's like, how do you implement it? So if you've got an athlete who's returning back from some sort of rupture, a ligament rupture, how would you actually walk them through that process? They've already been with you for about a year or so.
Yeah. So it's interesting we're talking about this now, because I feel like the last time we spoke on this, we have gone through a lot of changes because we have a very collaborative department between us and athletic medicine. And it's been kind of a vision for like 3-4 years that we're like, we have to get better at getting that gray area of return to actual performance. One of the biggest things is to understand, right, is that when an athlete gets hurt and they get medically cleared, that just kind of lets me know, hey, the athlete is safe, but that does not mean they're anywhere near performance again and being able to step on the court or on the field. So that process has changed for us. It's ever evolving. One of the things that we're doing now, I would like to say better because we have a little bit more experience, is using a lot of KPIs through force plates. Where I think back when we talked, I don't remember if that's when we had just kind of gotten force plates in our facility, but it took us a solid year of doing some testing, understanding that. So one of the things we're doing across the board that we had changed the last year is when athletes come in as part of their physicals, we developed a testing battery with the force plates. We want to get baseline numbers on them, and then we're retesting that a couple times during the semester. One of the important reasons for us is, in the event that an athlete gets hurt, we want to go back and look at those KPIs prior to them getting hurt, so that we can now have some data to rely on to let the coaches know, hey, yeah, they've been medically cleared, but they're not hitting numbers anywhere near to where they were in competition. So we need to get back to that. So that's been the primary driver of really getting an athlete back to return to performance, is that relying on those markers. We've stuck to some basic stuff, man, as far as the tests we do. We do counter movement jump, mid thigh pull, and this last year we started integrating more like a drop jump. And the metrics we're looking at are just peak power per body mass. We're looking at the asymmetries, but every athlete has a signature. It's kind of what makes them athletes. They're going to have asymmetries. We just don't want those to be too extreme, but also we want them to be somewhat similar if we're going to get them back to allow them to play on this for their sport. As so the timeline is going to change. I think that's one thing we've done really good of a job the last year and changing is from the medical side. Like I said, we collaborate really well, but we have a trainer that's leading it really, really well on their side, and he's trying to change the stands in his area of, hey, we've kind of been approaching this injury stuff for the last 20 years in our side as like, oh, if you get an ACL, this is the certain timeline that you should, by the time you're whatever 3 months post-op, you should be doing this. He's challenged the trainers on that side to be like, we got to rethink the way we do things, because it's no longer at the 3-month mark they should be running or whatever it is. It's no, there's actual markers that we have now that we're going to have to rely on. So it's hard to say, like, the process is not the same for everybody. Once they tell us they're safe, we start incorporating more weight room stuff. If you want to get into kind of the specifics of that, we'll go through a heavy accumulation phase where we're introducing volume again, lighter weights, and we have placed a ton of emphasis though on the joints, on the elasticity. So we're looking to integrate a lot more like submax plyos early on in return to play scenarios.
Yeah, no, I think it's important to get clarity in terms of what that actually looks like, because what we tend to see, even at the junior level, is, I guess, the lack of that transition across from, they're injured, they can't move, now they're able to fully function, but we got to return that load back into the individual essentially in order to be able to tolerate the training that's coming ahead, and then in order to get somewhat close to what they've been able to perform previously in terms of the load needed for game day or competition. That's probably the biggest issue, is bridging that gap for a lot of athletes. So how do you go about with that transitionary side? So like you said, you have like an accumulation phase, you're building, you might do some, deep tier plyos, more yielding work to build up that tissue quality. And then when do you, like, you're obviously working with the head coach at the time in terms of what they can and cannot do. So how's that conversation with the head coach of, letting the athlete know that you can only do this, this, and this, and you have to avoid this?
Yeah, I think keeping it so answering the question of the coaches first. Most sport coaches, man, I've worked with a pretty good amount, is they like to know really pretty simple. What can the athlete do? What can they not do? Tell me that, and then I will handle that. At least most of the ones that I work with are pretty respectful of that. They don't really care about the anatomy or the physiology of like, well, what's going on. They're like, just tell me what this kid can do and what can they not do. They'll adjust the practice, and we go from there. We keep them up to date with all like the testing markers that we're doing. Like, hey, coach, let you know we tested today. They're looking pretty good, getting closer to whatever it is. Or, hey, we've now started integrating small jumps. Let's say we'll take a volleyball, for example, because it's a current sport I'm working with, but it could start being like, hey, they started doing some pretty low impact plyos. Means for you, maybe that means they could start now doing some serves, some stuff that's a little bit more stationary before we integrate them fully into something else. As far as the actual process, so here's where I took some notes because I did want to talk about it. One of the things that we worked on collaboratively with our athletic medicine department is we try to break down the process of getting them back to return to performance into steps. So the trainer that I work with very closely, his name is Ben Crawford. I might have you get him on the show one day because he's a really smart guy. So we looked at it as the phases of rehab or return to performance, and broke it down to 5 things. Like the beginning of it is the foundation. They get hurt. We want to reestablish a foundation back for the athlete. That's primarily going to be on his side, which is the healing, getting the muscles or the tissues back to as functional as possible, establishing range of motion again. But then we come in pretty quickly in the second part of that, which we termed it the reload phase. For the reload phase, that's when we're trying to introduce now lifts. So we're going back to basic lifts, a lot of accumulation, high volume. We're seeking hypertrophy, but within this phase, we're really targeting a lot of the tissues and the joints and the ligaments by doing those low intensity plyos, because we want that tissue to be able to handle impact later on. So we want to build that robustness of it. Phase 3, if they clears that, then we get into what we call like the accumulation phase. We termed it for both of the areas. But this is now where we're trying to go build more strength capacity. So volumes dropping down in the lifts. We're starting to ramp up the weight, but we're also hammering a lot of deceleration movements as far as in the plyometric realm. And you mentioned earlier, like the ISO yielding stuff. That's something we've integrated a lot the last year, and we've kept it year round with a lot of the teams, and even for healthy athletes. And we're using it to target a lot of specific joints or specific ranges of motion where there might be struggling. If it's at a split squat position, if there's pain, I don't know, let's say at the lower part of the split squat, then we're going to try to build up that area specifically, and that allows us to do that with the ISO work. But the ISOs are staying year round, and they're really quickly introduced in the reload phase. They'll stay in the accumulation phase. We might just start to extend the time or try to add some load if it's possible for the athlete. After phase 3, phase 4, we call it the transition to chaos. So this is when we're starting to integrate them back into sports scenarios where if it's volleyball, they're now doing approach runs, or they're trying to integrate into some live play. The importance for this phase, I think, is one of the areas where a lot of problems can happen. Is the return to chaos or transition to chaos is now where the athletes have to make decisions, and everything is not set in stone, right? Like when you're on the court, when you're on the field, you can't predict what's happening next. So they have to make a decision, and we want to see how their body reacts now under that ambiguity, so to speak, of now I got to make a choice. Am I going to have to cut here? Nobody's telling me, hey, this is where I'm stopping and I have to go back. No, now it's live play. Then the final stage is resilience. By this point, hey, they're fully integrated. They can now compete. They've cleared all the hurdles. The KPIs look good. They've matched them or surpassed prior to them getting hurt.
If you're getting value from the In Athlete podcast, make sure you like, subscribe, and leave a review. It helps more parents and young athletes find the right guidance and keeps this podcast growing. Back to the show. Yeah, no, I like the introducing the chaotic nature. It's definitely one of the girls I've been working with, the soccer. What did she do? She tore a syndesmosis tear. Okay. So at the end of the season, and now she played a first half pain free, and she looked really light and bouncy. And there's something that I mentioned before, obviously, and you mentioned as well, is the isometrics. Now, kind of going back to the point of the isometrics, I also included it as part of like all year round. Obviously, certain periods like off season, after major competitions, I'll reintroduce it because we tend to take out a lot of movement patterns that we do within the gym setting because it's obviously a lot more specific to their sport. So I want to be able to reintroduce them to those positions before I start to gradually load them up as well. So it might be, doing some sort of isometric circuit, accumulation of 2 minutes, hold for 30 seconds to just move on to the next position. But it's creating that joint positioning awareness, clean up any gunkiness that is within the joint, breaking to any adhesions or scar tissue that might be still lingering around. And especially like with a lot of my swimmers, obviously their anterior part of the shoulder joint becomes really tight, restricted. So what's a good way to actually start to open up through the chest? Just doing a kneeling push-up hold, for tight. Yeah, just open them up, and then doing some isometrics on the posterior side. Just do a TRX row hold. Keep it a really simple, basic. Start to load up the tissue again without causing stupid amounts of fatigue, and it kind of gives them a little bit of a break and prevents that just constant battering through those specific structures as well.
Agreed. It's we kept it simple. One of the things you said, like I said, even in a healthy population, we're having this, and we're like, okay, we're going to try to introduce it to every team. And some of the things we're doing, fairly basic movement patterns. You touched on one. I've used the TRX row very extensively with a lot of teams. Easy for the posterior chain. We have a SCAP, the ones that can handle some of the more, let's say, overhead demand sports. We'll do a SCAP pull-up, and we'll do a split squat, skater squat, and then a push-up, and we kind of alternate through those throughout the week.
No, that's good. And how do you go with like athletes' expectations in terms of returning to play? Some athletes, they adhere to it to a T, to a timeline. Some athletes just want to rush back into it. And then some athletes' adherence is not not the greatest. So always a mixed bag. It's like licorice all sorts. You don't know what you're going to get.
It is. Part of that is like when they're going through this process, like within the initial, when the initial injury happens and they're going through that of getting medically cleared, our medical staff does a great job of kind of letting them know what the process is going to be. When we start going in and integrating with them, we have a communication that's happening every day between us and the athletic trainer, and when necessary, we're looping in the coach. But it's one of those things, like most of the athletes are motivated enough to want to do the work, and we tend, in those scenarios, we tend to get them in a smaller group or in a one-on-one setting. So it tends to be a little bit easier to get them to do the work, and they're not going to be able to half-ass the effort, so to speak, because we're right there. We're in one-on-one setting. Yes, some of the kids get frustrated, especially with the pressures now of they got to compete in NIL and stuff like that. But most of the time, we keep it pretty open and sincere with them of, here's a process, you're progressing well, here's what we got to look forward to next, or this didn't look quite right, man, we're going to have to backtrack a little bit. At least on my end, I try to keep it pretty open and helping them understand, here's the next step you're working towards. If we can't get there, then we're going to have to backtrack to this. And we also integrate our sports dietitian in some of the injuries that can be like more that require surgery, because we want to get education on nutrition right away to help them understand what stuff that's going to help them repair tissue faster. And we'll talk on this later, but talking on the sports, on the mental side of things, we also have developed a system where it's mandated for any athlete that undergoes surgery that they have to touch base with one of the sports psych staff members to help get an understanding where they're at going into the surgery and coming out of it. So that has helped the process a lot, because it takes some of us the stuff off our plate.
Yeah, and it'll take the mental load off everyone as well, knowing they actually have some sort of like psychological support along the way. And that was literally the next topic I was going to move into as well. Is obviously you have athletes that return, and then you may have athletes that have had just a history. They got peaks and valleys, and then obviously that approach is going to be a little bit different. It's like, okay, you've done this way for so long throughout your career. Do you want to continue on down this path of just getting just right, or just get back on the field, and then it's more than likely it's going to repeat itself? Like we know the likelihood of injury is a pre-existing injury, especially we tend to see patterns all the time as well, in terms of the way we move, and the mechanisms that are at play that just continue to drive that over time. So if anything, you just continue to just repeat the same thing without doing anything different. So how do you go about that? Obviously you have the sports psychologist that comes in, and that, I guess, that mental performance coaching. How do the athletes respond to that? And then what's kind of like the process of, the pre-surgery, the post-surgery, and then like the return to play with the psychological side?
I'm going to differentiate a little bit. So not every athlete is the same. And you touched on this. The reason is some kids are good at it, some are not. But I think the best athletes that I've helped, that I've worked with here at Arizona, and just in general, the best athletes don't wait until they're struggling for something. They don't wait to seek and use the tools around them. So the really elite kids, they understand the help of mental performance and why it's there, and they try to get in front of it. So I've had some great athletes that before the season even starts, and we're kind of in that off-season period, they're just getting back. They're already trying to get a meeting with one of our sports psych staff members to touch on, like, hey, you know what? I need a better routine for pregame to get in a good mental state. And it's kind of the same thing that you see for those that get hurt and are in a situation like that. Is the ones that have a great elite mentality, man, they're approaching that with like, hey, this is a setback. I know I can come back from this. This is not, in most cases, right, they're going to recover and be able to play the sport again unless it's a catastrophic injury. And they normalize it. I think that's one of the things that has changed. Elite athletes have kind of helped normalize that stigma around that if you need mental performance, it's not because you're struggling with something, it's because you want to up your game on the mental side. So that process, again, it's mandated from our athletic medicine staff. If you are going through a surgery, something pretty big happened, season ending, they have a check-in with the sports psych staff, and that stays kind of between them. After the surgery happens in that first month, they'll have at least one check-in. If the athlete decides they want more check-ins, then they're more than welcome to set up that time with them. And it goes back to what I said, the ones that understand the importance of it, that are elite, they will set up a routine checkup with them and talk through the process. Because it has its up and downs. They're going to have some good days. They're going to have some pretty bad days, and it's just part of it. We also, they're in communication with us because we have monthly or bi-weekly meetings that we term like performance meetings. I guess we've changed names a couple times on them, man. But in this meeting, it's typically us, nutrition, sports psych, athletic medicine, coaches, even academics that'll be in that. And that's what will bring up situations of, hey, we're noticing an athlete that's struggling in every area. The athletic medicine staff can mandate for them to meet. They can't mandate for them to, like, hey, you have to have regular sessions, but at least a mandatory check-in. And from that, we can gain a lot. I would say it goes back to the person, but pretty healthy amount of them will continue and seek services to try to get into a better state.
No, that's good. No, it's really good. And then performance under pressure. Now, this is getting a lot more steam now on social media of like, how are we setting up athletes to be able to perform under pressure? So whether it is, and we just discussed about Wisconsin, defeating Michigan, absolute clutch, and then, a couple of days later, defeating Minnesota as well.
Yeah.
How does an environment? How do you see it from your perspective, from all the head coaches that you work with, and getting the athletes being able to perform under pressure so they can perform in the gym? Performing in the gym, there's obviously you gaining by progressing, getting better over time, or beating your PB by 5 pounds, or your vertical jump increases by half an inch. How do you go about working with the sports psych and the head coach and the athletes in order to improve their on-field performance under pressure?
That's a wrap for part 1 of this episode on the In Athlete podcast. We've covered some incredible insights today, but there's still so much more to come. Make sure to tune in to part 2 for the rest of the conversation. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, give us a like, and share it with your network to help us reach even more listeners like you. Thanks for joining me, and I'll catch you in part 2.